John Robert Klein's my political hero, one of the founders, along with John Hodge, of the labour movement, a textile worker, a cotton mill worker who started work at the age of 10 and was one of the first Labour MPs in 1906. He said famously, "The socialist differs from the trade unionist in work and wage matters only in the fact that he, excuse the gender, he would ask for the trade unionist more than the trade unionist asks for himself. These two bodies are not opposite sex. They are two branches of the same protest against leaving the workers to the mercy of capitalism." In other words, the ambition of the socialist for the worker is in fact greater than the understandably narrow self-interest of the trade unionist. And how we bring politics and parliament to bear in that is crucially important. Again, a fundamental piece of analysis is required. The founders of our movement did not set out to win the class war by, in the way that the Bolshevists and the Communists set out to do, but they set out to eradicate the class system. They saw nationalisation as the way of ameliorating the exploitation of workers, and by a means of fair shares as well. But that basic principle of eliminating that class system so that there was genuine equality and equality of opportunity was at the core of trade unionism and labour, and I believe it still is today. There will be those, following yesterday's results, who say that we should get rid of the link with the trade unions. That will happen, and our enemies will force that, and mark my words, the coalition will propose legislation against trade union funding in the political levy area and against the funding of the Labour Party. Mark my words, they will do that because they are reactionary in this regard, and the Liberal Democrats, in my experience, more so than some in the patrician wing of the Conservative Party. But what is the way forward then? The Labour Party, the Labour government, I believe, created the most favourable legislative framework that the trade unions could have ever dreamed of. The Employment Rights Act in 1909, I think it was, which brought in recognition, right to representation. Of course, the social chapter itself, one of the first executive acts of the Labour Party, Labour government in May 1997. The Modernisation Fund, the open door to trade unions. And Cathy, I was very pleased to hear what you said about your experience with Labour ministers. Certainly that open door, which was firmly shut during the Thatcher years, is an important part of the relationship. If you look at the issues of Labour's intervention in the labour market regarding terms of conditions and wages, the national minimum wage, which was of course opposed by many in the union movement because of the differential arguments and the free collective bargaining argument, an intervention in the labour market along with tax credits and other measures, equal pay for equal value being a very important one, despite of its problems that it's brought about. So with the legislative structure and the intervention in the wages and conditions, in the balance of supply and demand of labour, I think the Labour government's record is terrific. What I think is also true, however, and I speak as somebody who's been in a union for all of my life and worked for the General Municipal for the best part of 10 years in our efforts to modernise, what is true is that by and large trade unions haven't expanded in their membership. Some have, of course, through successful mergers, some have through successful recruitment by their own efforts and by restructuring of certain parts of their industries. In other words, friends, the unions have not been able to take advantage of that atmosphere that has been created. Now, I know there are problems, of course, the pettiness of some of the rulings in the courts over the Unite action, for example, at BA. We have got to do that. Whether John McDonnell's Act is the best way of doing that, I don't know. But we cannot, I think, go forward on that basis. So what is the answer? What I want to put on the table today backs up what has been said. I believe that the party and the unions must go full pelt for greater mutualism, greater involvement and participation of employees in their enterprises and organisations, more cooperativism, more mutual ownership, more of, in fact, what our forefathers before nationalisation became the policy saw for our people. There are a number of reasons for this which chimed with the times. The demutualisation of building societies was a terrible error. I understand why people voted for it. But not only did it create a banking system, or help create a banking system that was overexposed to loans, but it broke that sense of shared ownership, of shared involvement, of shared asset investment in our communities. And I think that's particularly true, although not exclusively, in the northern towns. A greater say by employees in how they run, how their organisations are run, is good for those employees and good for those organisations. I don't see the logic of some of those who argue, as somebody who would call himself a Blairite, on the issue of the interest of producers and consumers, how the logic goes to where we've got to. Yes, it is true, as Cathy has rightly said again, that we must, as democratic socialists, or social democrats if you prefer the phrase, we must put the interest of the public before the interest of the producer. The child's education is more important to me as a socialist, and I hope as a trade unionist, than is the interest of the National Union of Teachers. But it does not follow, friends, that what is in the interest of the children is necessarily not in the interest of teachers. And neither does it follow that what is in the interest of teachers is not in the interest of children. And I think somewhere in the mid part of this decade, we forgot that basic logical point. The involvement of teachers in a school's planning, the involvement of teachers in a school's development of its curricula, is indeed, what we argue, in other areas of policy such as academies, what sets that school on a better footing than what somebody once called the bog standard comprehensive. That very idea of participation, involvement where possible, joint ownership, mutualism, cooperativism, is what the labour movement must reclaim. You see, the big society is not just a gimmick. The big society is clever. Thatcher's claim that there was no such thing as a society is met by Cameron's adherence to what he calls the big society. We would be foolish to shun that. We have to do two things. We have to say, first of all, it's our idea. We've been doing it for 100 years. We had to do it when the state wouldn't do it for us. But we must also say that the best form of organising what he calls the big society, or we would call it, but we know what he means, is collectivism and cooperativism. That must be our argument, and we must win that argument in practice, as David Miliband's campaign proposed in recruiting community activists, which is incidentally exactly the same philosophy as the GMB's recruitment campaign, for those of you who are familiar with it. It's called different things. One's got fancy new labour management speak, and the other's got workerist leftism, but it's the same bloody thing. It's the same thing. What it says is identify what people are concerned about and be on their side, and they'll come to them, rather than saying, hey, come to us, and if you don't, you're wrong. We have to apply that philosophy to our community and society, not just to show that the big society is a cooperative venture, but ultimately to show that which we've lost out of in the last 40 to 50 years, and that is that the state itself is a cooperative body of mutual benefit of the peoples. And we have lost that argument in the last 40 to 50 years. The days of individualism, in my view, are over. The days of individualism bankrupted nearly this country, and if it had not been, in my view, for Gordon Brown, we would have gone down the tube. In my mind, there's no doubt about that. But we live in a time now where we have to show the alternative to individualism. And that, to my mind, is cooperativism, mutualism, involvement and participation, where applied by employees. And trade unions have to extend that ambition, as this paper shows, beyond the terms and conditions arguments, not just to the wider interests of the world of work, but the very issues of how organisations are run. That is what attracted people to trade unionism in the first place. So it seems to me we have to turn a chapter, and that chapter is, as I've tried to outline, broadly called cooperativism. It's at the heart of our philosophy, and to my mind, it's the way forward. Thank you.